This is Bill Whorton again. And on this particular section of our Vietnam Insane Asylum series, I think I want to talk about my time as a platoon commander, what it is to be a platoon commander in combat. Because over the years, I've had people ask me, what is it like being in combat as an officer? And actually, there's two different realms of experience for me in Vietnam. My first realm of experience was as an infantry platoon commander, and my second experience was as a senior battalion advisor. And these actually are different universes. So one of the things that I would like to do is I'd like to separate the universes and talk about them as individuals, what they are. Now, the time I'm going back to now is 1965 and 1966. Now, one of the things that I want everybody to understand out there is that I'm talking about a time when I was 24 and 25 years old. I am now 83 years old. I am not the person that I'm going to be talking about in this particular video. I am not that person anymore, okay? Now, I want my friends out there to understand that I don't particularly like that young man in 1965 and 1966. I don't particularly like him. I don't like his vicious temperament. I don't like many things about him. However, I want everybody to understand I deeply respect that young man. I deeply respect that young man, but I don't necessarily like him. And that is not me anymore. So I am returning to a time. I'm returning to a time that is long, long dead. I'm a dinosaur now speaking. At 83, I am now a dinosaur. I'm talking about a time that is long, long gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a world that doesn't exist anymore. However, it was a very, very interesting world. And it was a fascinating world at the time. And I think culturally, historically, and from the standpoint of just human nature, it's interesting to go back into time and to see how other people lived and thought and felt, and what their emotions were like and things like that also. So this is where I'm going back to. I'm going back to a world that doesn't exist anymore. And I think probably many people out there will say it never should have existed, but it did. And it was a very, very strange and a very interesting world. So let's go back in time. I'm now 24 years old, and I've arrived in Vietnam with my platoon. And as I mentioned before in another video, I was lucky beyond belief. I had 6 weeks in which to break in and learn about the basics of infantry soldiering in Vietnam, as opposed to any place else, because that break-in period is what saved my life and the life of my platoon. I learned how to fight. In other words, by not having to fight, because I was so near the base at that time in Da Nang, and we were in what we would call safe areas. We hadn't moved across the river to fight, regular Viet Cong units or North Vietnamese yet. So we were in a pretty safe area, but we'd still get, every once in a while, a sniper would open up or something like that to get our attention. But what we did was we started to learn how to move together. I made a lot of mistakes. And one of the things that I did with my platoon and my squad leaders especially is I was very open about the mistakes that I made. We got together in the evenings with the squad leaders and in the morning for break, when we get coffee together in the morning, and we talk over how we screwed up, what we did right, what we did wrong. We learned it's a working together. So one of the things that I want to emphasize in this video is not about me. It's not one of these I, me, my things and what a great guy I really and truly am. It's not about that at all. It's what I want to emphasize in this video is I was part of a really, really great group of Marines. And I was very, very fortunate to have 2 battalion commanders that were just absolutely wonderful. Also, I had 4 company commanders. 1 I won't talk about, but 3 were just absolutely magnificent. And 1 eventually got killed. So this is not all about me. One of the things, the first thing I kind of want to talk about is like, what kind of tactics did we use? What things did we learn how to do? Well, one thing that I found out, I think I mentioned before in one video, I had studied karate for 9 months. I'd lived my entire life off base, all my off-duty time in my first tour on Okinawa in 1960 and very early 1961. All of my off-duty time, I lived in a karate dojo in Nago, Okinawa. And my master was Nakamura Shigeru. And you can look him up on Google because he was he was the most well-known karate instructor on Okinawa and later made a big name for himself, teaching some movie stars and things like that. But I was, at that time in 1960, I was the only white guy there. So one of the things that I learned under him is my style of fighting is basically that of being a counterpuncher. I am instinctively a counterpuncher. So this is the style of fighting that I adopted as a platoon commander in Vietnam because I think it was most effective. Now, when you're a counterpuncher, you're living in a world where the enemy, your opponent, is always going to get the first blow. So what you have to do is you have to learn how to block, deflect, and react quickly. Everything depends on speed. So this is the world I taught my squad leaders. This is the world I want us to learn how to fight in. We were going to have to learn how to be counterpunchers because the enemy, our opponent, is always going to get the first punch in. They're always going to get the first punch in. Okay? So this is what we have to learn what to do. Now the enemy, smart, very, very smart. And one of the things in fighting our enemy, well, the first enemy is booby traps, man traps, punji pits. That doesn't require any kind of fighting. That's just simply there. All the villages that we fought in and around there, because we fought in those villages, they were all loaded with booby traps. So I would say over my time in Vietnam, my first tour, probably most of my combat casualties came from booby traps, the man traps, the punji pits, all that kind of stuff. Because this is, and of course that was good for the enemy because every time one of my men got hit by a booby trap, lost a hand, lost a foot, lost a leg, or wounded severely someplace else, whatever. Okay, we had to stop. Helicopters come in. The operation would have to stop. We'd have to do that, take care of that. And then, of course, the enemy can move on down the line or they can set up wherever they want to. They can do whatever they want to. They had total flexibility. That's the world we lived in. The enemy had total flexibility to do everything they wanted to do. So we had to be so very, very careful. Now, 2 of their favorite tactics, especially for the Viet Cong, was, first of all, draw the enemy, out into an open rice paddy where they would have foxholes dug all around, and we'd get sucked out there. The whole unit would get sucked out into the open chasing a few VC, and then get sucked into this area, and then it would be Custer's last stand. I lost my roommate, for example, my roommate in basic school. He landed in Vietnam. He lasted between 5 and 15 minutes into his first firefight, and then he and his platoon were annihilated. by just that. He was aggressive. He was taught in basic school, be aggressive, be aggressive, be aggressive. And he was aggressive. Well, there's good aggressive and there's bad aggressive in Vietnam, okay? And what he did was bad aggressive, okay? Got wiped out. Another favorite tactic of the Viet Cong would be to get, if there was a unit, a Marine Corps unit walking in a long column, say down a trail in the jungle, or it could be any place actually. But jungle was preferable for this. What they would do is they would simultaneously hit the front and hit the rear of the column. So by doing that, of course, then see the column begins to kind of curl around. It curls around on both ends and leaves the middle somewhat open. So what the enemy would do was go right through that middle. They would go right through that middle. And then as soon as they did that, they would start cutting up both sides. And they would start cutting pieces off, and then annihilation. Or again, if the unit could call somebody in to help, maybe salvation then. But that would be one of their favorite tactics, and it was very effective. It worked very, very well. So what we had to do is, I stressed over and over to my squad leaders and my men, what we have to do is, as soon as we're hit, we have to move. We have to move immediately. And moving will depend on the situation. I want the squad leaders to move as they see fit, but they have to move to attack the flanks. If we're hit on the front, then I want a squad leader moving around attacking that flank. They have to hit. That was the kind of thing that we had to do. You had to maneuver. And that is the art of counterpunching, is when you're hit, you counterpunch. Deflect as much as you can, block as much as you can, but you have to move and you have to make that counterattack work, okay? So that's what we did. Now, we did that quite a bit. But again, life in Vietnam, you could do that against the VC, for example, the Viet Cong. But if you were against a large North Vietnamese regular army unit, and they're using anti-aircraft guns, and they're chopping down the rice paddies that you're hiding behind, you're not going to get up and go anywhere, okay? Because if you do, you're just going to get wiped out. So again, flexibility, common sense, always the rule. But when I talk about counterpunching, probably one of the greatest examples of counterpunching that I know of, I want to talk about my squad leaders, my platoon sergeants, and I want to talk about some of the great Marines I served with. I had one squad leader, Robert Ortego. Great squad leader. Now, the background for him being a squad leader is this. Very, very early in Vietnam, I saw what a great Marine he was. I think he was only a private first class then. The squad leader was a corporal. But I talked with my platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Howard George, a great platoon sergeant, great guy. And I said, I want him to be the squad leader. And of course, Sergeant George is saying, well, wait, but he's PFC or Lance Corporal. I can't remember his exact rank. It was either private first class or Lance Corporal. I can't remember right now. But the squad leader was a corporal. And I said, I'm going to make him the squad leader because he is instinctive. He has a feel for terrain. He's got a feel for movement. He's got a feel for leadership. People collect around him. I said, he's just got a real feel for combat. So Sergeant George said, okay. So I talked to the squad leader, the corporal. I said, look, you can get me in a lot of trouble if you decide to take this to, say, a request master of the company commander or the battalion commander. I said, you can get me in a lot of trouble over this. And the squad leader looked at me and he said, I want him to be the squad leader. That's the world we lived in, because he knew that his chances of getting back alive were better with him being the squad leader than him. Now, that was an act of unselfishness that I made very, very clear on that corporal's proficiency and conduct remarks. When I took good care of him too, because he was completely unselfish about the whole thing. And everybody understood, what was going on. So no problem. But anyway, I had to send, by this time, we got him to corporal real fast, and then we got him up to sergeant real fast with the company commander, my battalion commander, because I was always praising him. So we got him up to rank. So as a sergeant, to emphasize my point about counterpunching, I had to send out, this was after a big battle, I only had 23 men left of my platoon. I'm supposed to have 60 men. I have to send out a patrol to go down to an area, and I'm talking to my company commander, 7 men? I'm going to send seven Marines down there, kind of thing. And I said, sir, I can't do that, and he just said, shut up and do it, and of course, being a Marine, aye, sir. And so I gave Sergeant Ortega my shotgun. I carried a shotgun at the time. And I made everybody carry automatic weapons. He had a shotgun and 6 automatic weapons with him. And then maybe about 45 minutes after the patrol went out, I heard one hell of a firefight going on down at another location. And I thought, oh, Jesus. And then I got a call from my company commander and then another one from my battalion commander. And they said, get over to Highway 1 at this location. And he said, your patrol got ambushed, and by friendly fire, by friendly forces, by a South Vietnamese Ranger unit. Well, what had happened is this South Vietnamese Army Ranger unit, about 40 Army guys, had set up a perfect ambush in exactly the wrong location. They weren't supposed to be there, but they'd set up this perfect ambush in this location. And my squad had come along, and they ambushed my squad, Sergeant Ortega. So he was ambushed by 40 Army guys. So what did he do? Immediately after the first shot went off, he turned his shotgun, and everybody in the squad turned their automatic weapons, and they jumped into that ambush site. They just jumped into the ambush site, killing everybody that they could. And then Sergeant Ortega kicked a steel helmet. And then as soon as he told me, he said, sir, as soon as I kicked that steel helmet, I knew that they weren't VC. They weren't North Vietnamese. They were our guys, somewhere, because the enemy doesn't wear steel helmets. It's all bamboo for them. So I got a ceasefire going. So anyway, after it was all over, I had about 3 or 4 of the Marines. They had bullet holes going through their shirts and their trousers, but nobody was wounded. And they killed a whole bunch of the Rangers. The Army, there was an Army major down there with my battalion commander, and he was just in hysterics because his platoon got wiped out. Basically, I don't know how many were killed and how many were wounded, but it was a lot. So anyway, my battalion commander said, your squad did a marvelous job. But he said, this incident's going to be in front of General Westmoreland tomorrow. So, but he said, your squad did great. But this is what I'm talking about. This is what you have to do in combat. You just can't sit and you have to move. Now, that's one of the reasons why my platoon, the entire time I was in Vietnam, my platoon took the point every time. because if we were hit up front, I always maneuvered. I never sat down, let's wait for the artillery, or let's wait for some helicopters, or let's wait for this or that. No, you have to move, because if you don't move, the enemy's going to move on you. And these people move. I mean, the Viet Cong we faced, they were really, really good, and they knew every inch of that terrain. They knew every inch of it. They lived there their whole lives. They knew it. So they would move on us. If you don't move on them, they're going to move on you. So this is kind of the tactical stuff that I was talking about. Another thing that was kind of interesting is people were asking me about, well, when you're in combat that long, how do you feel? How do you deal with stress? Well, in this era, and I'm talking again 1965, we didn't have any real concept of what nowadays is called post-traumatic stress disorder. we had no real concept of that. Okay, we were familiar with terms of battle fatigue or shock or combat fatigue or that kind of thing. I mean, we had cases of where all of a sudden in our company, in our battalion, if we were out in the company of battalion, every once in a while after our fight or something, we'd see maybe one of the older sergeants or even some of the younger ones that all of a sudden they just stand there and they'd be sobbing their guts out, and they'd be shaking and sobbing their guts out. And we were always very, very gentle with them. Very, very gentle. There was never a harsh word, anything. Because one of the things that we understood is that that's us down the line. Because there's only so much people can take. And so that's us down the line. In one case, I had one of my Marines. I saw him in a firefight, and he was shooting high. I mean, he wasn't shooting at the enemy. He was shooting high. And so at the end of the fight, I asked him, I got the squad leader and platoon sergeant, and I said, hey, what's with this guy? You know, he's shooting high. And then the squad leader says, well, he doesn't like war. And he just doesn't want to kill anybody. And I said, well, then he's in the wrong place. He's in the wrong place. And so I got a hold of the individual, and he told me, he said, he just very, very polite. He said, sir, I just can't kill anybody. I just can't do it. And so here I am looking at a very, very good, very decent, very moral young man who has absolutely no business whatsoever being in Vietnam. None whatsoever. So I talked it over with Staff Sergeant George, and we were able to get him back to the rear. Nobody said a word. Just I had a very good relationship with my company first sergeant, a very good relationship with him. So we were able to get him back to the rear, and he finished out his time in the Marine Corps, got an honorable discharge. But there's no point. There's just simply no point in trying to hurt somebody like that, because one of the things a platoon commander has to have is this. A platoon commander, to be effective as a combat officer, you have to have a real streak of cruelty in you. Somewhere in your system, there has to be that desire to close with and kill. It has to be inside you. It's not nice, but you have to have that quality, because this is a very, very brutal business. It's a very brutal business. Now, that doesn't mean brutal in this case doesn't mean you have to be a sadist, and it doesn't mean you have to be a psychopath, but it's a brutal business. I never looked upon the military profession as being a moral one because we kill people. That's what we do. As combat officers, we kill people. We hunt them down and kill them. And we do that based on orders, legal orders. Okay? So, in effect, what we do is we take orders from politicians, and I think all of us understand the basic morality of politicians. I think we don't have to go into that. But that's what we do. We obey their orders, legal orders. And that's what we have to do. So this is in this realm of brutality, there is room for compassion, and there is room for morality, but you have to measure it out pretty carefully, okay? Because the main business is the killing. And remember this, you're dealing with an enemy that lives only to kill you. And they're very, very good at it. They're very, very, very good at it. Okay? So that's the world we lived in. Now, one of the things that came up in my case, people ask me, well, did you ever feel? And yes, there was a time, a very, very unfortunate experience for me is after one battle. It was a pretty big battle, a lot of casualties. Our company had been attached to another battalion, and this battalion had really, they'd been ambushed. And when a battalion is ambushed by a North Vietnamese army unit, that means that the battalion commander has really screwed up. Because to be ambushed means to be screwed up. It means that you weren't ready, for them. They're waiting for you and you're not ready for them, okay? So that's a screw up. So in this screw up, this North Vietnamese unit that we were fighting, I won't go into the nature of the battle or even the location, and certainly not the unit. But what happened is I lost 7 of my men. I lost 7 wounded. Fortunately, none of them were killed and none of them were really mutilated, but all 7 went back to the United States. And I met several of them when I got wounded, and I went back to the Great Lakes Naval Hospital. But I'll talk about that a little later. But anyway, I lost 7 men. So when the battle was over, and this was also a time, an image came to my mind that I'll never, ever forget. It was raining, and as I looked up the trail, there was water coming down the trail a little bit, and all the water in the trail had turned pink from the blood of dead Marines. And I looked up the trail, and there was just mound after mound of dead Marines. Now, that's kind of a tough thing to look at. So when I got back to the battalion area, I was briefed by my battalion commander wanted to see me because I'll talk about this a little later, but I had a very good relationship with my battalion commander. My battalion commander really liked me. So he called me in and he told me, he said, as the result of the ambush, the battalion was ambushed. He told me the final result is that the higher ups had decided that it was a great victory and they were going to hand out a lot of medals around to everybody, because it was one of these things. This is frequently done all over Vietnam. It was done in the Army, it was done in the Marine Corps, it was done all over. You can see this in memoir after memoir after memoir. Don't take my word for it. You used to read lots and lots of memoirs and you'll see the same thing. It was very common after a battle where a lot of casualties were taken. 2 ways to go. Hand out medals, declare a great victory, or relieve the commanding officer and not say anything. Okay, there was about 2 ways to handle that. Okay, for example, after the battle of the great victory of the 1st Air Cav in the Ai Drang Valley, we had X-ray, followed a couple days later by a disaster at Albany. So everybody heard about X-ray, but nobody ever heard about Albany. That was very, very standard at that time. So anyway, I'm back at the mess hall. My battalion commander has already briefed me on what's happening, and I briefed him. And my level of cynicism, the mendacity that I lived in, everybody lying to you all the time about how the local Vietnamese, are going to love you and want democracy and all that, and then there's all the lies that you get from the senior officers, and everybody lies. Mendacity permeated the whole system. I was very, very cynical, and of course that blow at that particular time made me even more cynical. So I'm in the mess hall with 2 of my buddies, and we are really, the language we used was vile beyond belief. Well, a REMF officer came in, a senior officer came in, one of the non-combats, what I call the REMF, the rear echelon, and then bad word, kind of thing, came in, heard our speech, and then he really lit into us about how we weren't gentlemen and we weren't officers and gentlemen and blah, blah, blah. And I at that time, my temper, it was just, I let go. And I don't remember, I can't, there's a lot of things I can't say and I won't say, in this video. I won't use the language I use. But basically what I inferred is how dare a non-combat piece of garbage like you even talk to combat officers, men that face fire. How dare you, kind of thing. And of course, that didn't go over well. So he started screaming again, and I jumped to my feet, and my 2 buddies grabbed me, and he ran out of the tent screaming, court martial, court martial. Okay. So anyway, I went back to my platoon sergeant, Jim Eakins, and said, Jim, I'm in big trouble. Because I'm guilty, there's no getting around it. I'm guilty, and that guy's going to court martial me. So anyway, we had to go out on an operation the next day. We are in the field for about a week, and I kept waiting for, I haven't been notified about my court martial yet, kind of thing. So after about a week, the operation's over. I was back in the rear again for a little bit. And so I wondered what was going on. So I went to a gunnery sergeant who was on the battalion staff. And this gunnery sergeant was one of these guys that knew everything, every piece of gossip there was in the battalion. So I went to him and I said, what's going on? And he just laughed at me. And he said, you mean you don't know? And I said, know what? And he said, your platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant James Eakins, went to that officer's tent and would not leave his tent until the officer promised that he would not make any charges against me. He refused to leave the senior officer's tent until the senior officer promised that he wouldn't leave. He was there all night long and he said he wouldn't leave the officer's tent until that officer had promised that he wouldn't do anything against me. Now, James Eakins, Staff Sergeant James R. Eakins, never forget it. He put his career on the line for me because as a staff sergeant, you don't go to a senior officer's tent and tell them what they are and what they're not going to do. You don't do that in the Marine Corps. But he did that. And he did that for me. I went back to Jim and I said, Jim, I'll never ever be able to repay you for this. And he just went, that's all. No need to talk further. But then I needed to do something myself, because good manners, and I did have some manners, good manners, my mother trained me to do this, is I went to the senior officer's tent and went through the formality of, "Sir, Lieutenant Whorton requests permission to speak." He gave me permission, and I said I wanted to offer my apologies for my very, very inappropriate behavior. And I wanted to assure him that it would never happen again. And I wanted to apologize personally. And then he unloaded again on me. He said, "I don't think you're an officer. I don't think you're a gentleman." He said, "I don't think you're a gentleman at all. I think you're completely unfit to be an officer." But he said, "Your sergeant came in," and he said, "It was apparent to me that he is probably the finest staff sergeant that I have ever seen in my military career." And he said, if he's going to, what he said is he said, "I can't leave this tent because we need him. Our platoon needs him, Lieutenant Whorton, to survive in combat. We need him. And without him, we're going to have a lot of dead Marines that don't have to die." And he said, as soon as Sergeant Eakin said that, he said, I really didn't have any choice anymore. He said, I really did, as a Marine, he said, I didn't really have a choice. So despite what I think you are, he said, I have to respect him and his opinion. So that's how that ended. So he said, I still think you're not a gentleman. And it was very, very clear that there was a strong, very strong mutual hatred between both that officer and myself. But at the same time, we were both Marines. And we both, at age 83, I'm going to speak now as an 83-year-old, I can look back and say, I really respect that officer because he got beyond his ego. He got beyond his ego and thought about what was good for the Marine Corps. And I respect myself because I got beyond my ego and I apologized. Okay. But I should have. But I respect that officer now for what he did because he got beyond his ego. We were both Marines. It's obvious we mutually hated each other, but the Marine Corps came first. So I didn't say a word. All I did was I was still in a position of attention. He didn't give me an ease. I was still in a position of attention. I did an about face and walked out. Fortunately, we never spoke to each other again. So that was one good thing. But this is an example of the kind of feeling that you develop in combat. Now, Jim Eakins was just so great, and he was always training me. We were up in the hills one day, and we'd been without food for a couple of days because the Marine Corps did not do resupply very well a lot of times. So sometimes we'd be out in the field, and we'd be out without food for a couple of days. So this is one of those times. And so the men were getting weak and we were hitting a pretty hard walk, hard pace. So one of my ammunition carriers dropped 2 cans of machine gun ammo. So I walked over and I picked up the machine gun ammo and I was going to carry it, to help out. And then Jim Eakins ran over and kicked both of the ammo cans out of my hand. And he said, "Sir," he said, you're our platoon commander. He said, "If we get out of this alive, it's because of you. It's because of you being able to clearly think, and you can't clearly think if you're carrying somebody else's ammo. You're going to get tired. So you're the platoon commander. He's the ammo carrier. He's got to carry the ammo. So do your job, Lieutenant." And I went, "Oh, Jim, you're always right." And Jim was always right in combat. He was always right. And then, but one of the things that comes up in conversations, well, what was your role as platoon commander? I mean, what did you do, kind of thing? Well, Marines, they expect their platoon commander, they want their platoon commander to simultaneously be two things: cautious and bold. You've got to be cautious and bold. And fortunately, that's one of the gifts that I had as a platoon commander. I was always very, very cautious, because in the back of my mind, there was always that term, there are no old, bold Marines. Oh, okay, there are no old, bold Marines. That always existed in my mind, but nevertheless, in combat, in actual fighting, you have to stand up, and you have to be there, and you have to do. You have to be there leading. That's your job. Now, leading comes under different categories. Probably one of the most interesting aspects of leadership that I ever did is one time we were out in the hills. Again, bad jungle, big hills. And there, I looked down, and there was this huge rice paddy. And in this rice paddy, it was filled with water, and there was a Marine Corps helicopter. Well, I knew what was coming up, but I had to report the helicopter. So I called my company commander and I said, okay, I see a helicopter down there. And he said, go down and check it out. And he said, do everything that you can to find some ID, if you could find anything down there. So we went down there. So I saw the helicopter. Now, beside the helicopter, on top of a rice paddy dike, I saw a human head. Now, half the head was down to the bone because it had been eaten out by the rats, but there was still flesh on the other half of the head. It was a Westerner, so it was American. And by the helicopter was this huge mass of human, it was human flesh. And this human flesh had turned into a really stinking, rotting mass of goo. It was just one huge mass of goo. And I looked at my Marines around, and the Marines were standing around looking. All of them were dry heaving, and a couple of them were vomiting, from looking at that. And I said, well, we're going to have to go down and check out for dog tags. And I looked at that. I looked at my platoon and I realized ain't none of them going down there checking out for dog tags. So I said, I told Jim, I said, Jim, set the platoon up. Okay, just set them on defense. So I went in by myself and went through all that massive stinking goo down way to where the ground was for the water. And I did that for about 20 minutes, no dog tags. But I ran my hands over about, I think it was either 2 or 3 sets of bones for a human body. I couldn't figure out whether it was 2 or 3, because there were just human bones down there. So anyway, I went down in that goo. And then when I got finished, went up, and some of my Marines had gotten some grass for me, and we got grass, and we tried to get the human goo off my trousers and off my shirt and stuff. So we did that, and then we just marched off. But as an officer, that's what you have to do. You're the leader, and you have to do that. And another thing is I learned a long time ago in the Marine Corps, you never give an order that's going to be disobeyed. And I knew that if I gave the order for them to get into that rice paddy and go down there, they weren't going to do it, because there's just something that was so repellent about that they were not going to do it. So there we go. Another time that you have to leadership is this. I got called in by the battalion operations officer my company commander told me, he said, go to the S3. He said, they need your platoon. He said, I got to give a platoon. He said, so it's going to be your platoon. So they got a special operation coming up. So I went in to see the battalion S3, the operations officer, and he said, okay, I want you to take your platoon to this location, and then from there at night, I want you to walk over to this location because you're going to be the anvil for a hammer and anvil. Hammer and anvil means that there's going to be some unit that's going to be sweeping down, and then the anvil is going to be waiting for the enemy to show up, so to speak. That was the idea of it. So I had to get my platoon into position at a fixed location by 6 o'clock in the morning. And that means that I had to walk at night, all night long, over. I can't remember now how far I had to go. I just can't remember how far, but it was a long distance. So what happened is that night, it started raining like mad. And it was just black. It was just black. It was so black out I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. So, and we had to get to this location. And I'm thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get there because I can't even see my hand in front of my face. So it became, I said, okay, we're gonna go to this location. And then everybody looks at me and says, what now, Lieutenant? What are we going to do now? And this is what we do. Because you have to make the decision. You're the officer. This is what you do for a living. It's all up to you. So what I said is okay, one way we're going to do this is I got map out, and I had a poncho over me, and I checked out the compass route. So we're going to go down by compass. And that means straight line. And it's raining like hell, black. And we're going to have to go over terrain that is really bad. And I'm just not sure how. So I said, what we're going to do is this. We're going to grab the cartridge belt, and we're going to walk in single line, grab the cartridge belt of the man ahead of us, and that's how we're going to do this. And now, along the way, things are going to happen. People are going to lose contact on their cartridge belts because they're going to fall down and stuff. Wait where you are. Somebody will come back and get you. Everybody check before and after, et cetera, et cetera. And sure enough, all night long, we're walking in the rain, and then word comes up, stop, we've lost people. Okay, got them, found them, back up again. So it's starting to get dawn, and I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, are we gonna make it? And then some VCs start shooting at us. There was a big bush, and the bush started running. And after the bush started running, one of my Marines just shot him because it was a Viet Cong, and then they started kind of sniping at us. And then I saw the objective, and then we just started running for it. And we just ran like hell. And we were supposed to be there at 6. We got there at 10 till 6. So this is the kind of thing that officers do. We're the final arbiter. You know, you have to lead. You have to do the leading. I think probably the proudest moment of my life was this. I want to end on this note. Over time, my platoon had become one in movement. Now, here we are. We're going to go to March 30th, 1966. This is the day before I am supposed to leave Vietnam. I'm supposed to leave Vietnam on March the 31st at probably around about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, get a resupply. I'm supposed to leave on March the 31st. So here we are. I'm in the field on March the 30th. So March the 30th, hotter than two hells. Hotter than two hells. And so we're walking across this huge rice paddy with lots and lots of, and the rice paddy is lots of jungle, lots of brush and things like that in patches across the rice paddy. So anyway, it's early afternoon, and again hotter than two hell. So I put my platoon in a big buffalo wallow under some palm trees, so they can get some shade. And then I hear a lot of shooting going on, and I look down, and there's a couple Marine Corps helicopters, and they're shooting down into a big brushy area about, I'd say about a mile off from where I am. So I'm looking down there, and I see these Marine Corps helicopters just shooting down there, and I can see the VC are in there. They're shooting back up at them. And so I report to my company. First of all, I take a look at that. It's not in my area of responsibility, but I look at that situation. I think those helicopters aren't going to get those VC. They're not going to get them. And I said, it's okay, and it's doable. And I just saw a chance to go down and kill some VC. So I know my company commander, I know my battalion commander, and I know what they're going to say. If I call them up and tell them that, okay, I want to go down there and get these guys, they're going to tell me, but you don't have to if you don't want to, Lieutenant. You don't have to. You don't have to do this. It's outside of our tactical area of responsibility. It's outside of our TAOR. So anyway, what I did was I knew that would be their response. So I got my squad leaders together, my platoon sergeant, and I had another platoon sergeant this time, Sergeant Blundell. Great guy. Great sergeant. Great platoon sergeant. So we get together, and I tell him, I said, okay, up to you guys. We don't have to do this, but this is doable. This is doable, but you guys make the call, because some of you are very, very short. Some of you only got a couple days to go. I'm going back tomorrow, kind of thing. But, it's up to you guys. What do you want to do? And the answer came back unanimous. Kill them. Let's go kill them. I said, okay, we'll do it. And that was the last order I issued. Squad leaders went back. My platoon jumped out of the buffalo pit, and they literally ran a mile in the hot sun, sorting themselves out. They jumped into the brush and just started killing Viet Cong. I ran down, it was next to a riverbank down there, and then my radio man, Jack Cook, he all of a sudden he yelled, "Lieutenant," and then he pointed his finger, and then it was just unconscious, totally unconscious. I had a map in my hand. I dropped the map, flipped up the shotgun, followed the shotgun along my radio man's finger, and I pumped 6 rounds. And it turned out I hit a young Viet Cong 6 times. I didn't even see him, but I hit him 6 times. Literally blew him to pieces with my shotgun. I didn't even see him. So I killed him. And then after it was all over, I reported back, and I can't remember how many Viet Cong we killed, but we killed, I think it was somewhere between 5 and 10. So I don't know how many. But anyway, we did that. That was one of the greatest, that was my final act. My platoon had taken on all the characteristics that I believe were important for Marines. They had become real killers. Not murderers, but killers. And that's the essence of soldiering.